we have one more person who's going to kind of tie everything she's heard together, and we'd like to welcome back Dr. Lori Gruen. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks. I'm just going to be very brief. This is such a powerful set of ways of understanding how difficult the parrot crisis is for human beings. Hector's stories were just incredible. Irene's facing such difficulty with prejudice towards the sort of megafauna in Africa. And of course, Janet's stories were just really heart-wrenching. And there's so much sadness and so much horror. I think it's really important to think about, again, ways to build bridges with organizations that can potentially be allies and helpful. Human rights organizations, for example, haven't spent enough energy thinking about and protecting eco-defenders and animal protectors. And those of us who have connections to the human rights organizations that have done remarkable work for refugees and other humans that are facing crises across various political, economic, and conditions have to be pushed to think about the environment and to think about those people who, as Hector told us, are being actually killed to protect the forests and to protect their environments. So I think that's a set of organizations that might be very useful. I was really pleased to know that the Jane Goodall Foundation in just this year has worked very hard to try to bridge from great apes to also do some work to promote the concerns of the gray parrots in Africa. So that's another way to go. Yesterday we talked about pushing against the airlines and People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, for all their difficulties, have been really successful in getting airlines to agree to, almost nearly every major airline has agreed not to ship monkeys. So this is another place to start building connections between those that are doing work for animals or for humans or for the environment. We could talk about compassionate conservation, but I want to be brief, and some of you are very well versed in that. The other thing I just wanted to say is that there's a lot of important ways in which, for those on the front line, sanctuary workers in particular, there really is, even though there's so much pressure and so much time, there's an absolute need to take care of one another, to figure out creative healing rituals, and to engage in self-care. These are three really important ways of being able to continue to be present for the parrots that we care about. I also just want to mention an older book written by a sanctuary founder who doesn't work with parrots, but did have two parrots and now one there at the sanctuary. Patrice Jones at Mind Sanctuary wrote a wonderful book called Aftershock, which addresses this concern about burnout and about how to deal with the great horrors that we're all carrying in the face of such violence and such cruelty and death. And I'll just leave it there so that people can ask more time for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Lori. You already offered some answers to some of the questions I was going to ask. So my first question is, because part of the reason for IAPP existing is we want to create a movement. We want a global campaign on the parrot crisis. So one of the questions I have is, do you think the harm to people would be an effective addition to a global campaign to stop the demand and the trade and result in no birds being kept in cages? So that's for any of the panelists, Hector, Janet, Lori, Irene. Any thoughts on that? For example, Irene, could something like, I'm sorry, go ahead, Janet.
I was going to say, I think absolutely. So our human connections certainly can help garner some assistance with this. It's sometimes not easy, to get people to understand and connect the way we do, maybe because we are working with these animals and these birds day in and day out. But there can be a connection then that people will have and are willing to help, help with the crisis and help solve the issues.
I was wondering, Irene, specifically in Kenya, I know it's difficult there, but if we were to make it part of a global campaign, are you having trouble unmuting? I can't tell. Do you think that would be a good idea? You and Hector, because I know Hector in Honduras, you could be even putting your life on the line by saying something. So would either of you have any thoughts on this? If there was a global campaign on the parrot crisis, would it be okay to talk about the kind of things people are facing in countries like Kenya and Honduras?
I think a global campaign would help, but you will need to understand that any campaign for any species like a bird would have to come up bigger things like our megafauna here. I mean, that would really be something to take on, and that's fine. And our red tape that I talked about, the red tape is not so much the papers to be signed to get research done. It is just corruption. You might even have people wanting to do research, but the people who will want to get money from people wanting to do research for the research licenses, we even have to pay a sister organization to do our research on birds. They don't even care what the birds are doing. They just want money. And for that reason, we are losing out on money to do research, money to set up good molecular genetic labs so that we can even just find out which parrot is ours, which parrot comes from Cameroon, so that we end up with situations like 25 parrots impounded on some airline going to like Saudi Arabia. But because we don't know which birds are ours, we can't even say, let them stay, because then the vets are up in arms saying, if you let them stay, then what if they have a disease? So just let them go. So here we are even looking like we are promoting the trade.
All right, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so it has to come from us. We have to have more disciples standing up for the birds.
In your country, not from outside.
Yes.
Okay. Got
if
it.
it comes more from outside, it is viewed as dollars. That's why one of my last slides had dollars. It's viewed as dollars because that's what you're looked at. When you're coming to this country, we don't look at you like Gail. We see money.
Right. So in other words, maybe we can support you in setting up some kind of internal organization within Kenya for people who care about the birds there. Maybe we can give you advice because we've done it, like Laura Kim is involved with Loros Sin Fronteras, and that is across many countries, but she knows how to set up that kind of thing. So yeah. Okay. I want to give Hector a chance to speak also. Sylvia, could you ask the question to or Laura Kim to Hector in Spanish? Because I'm not sure he caught what I was saying.
Yes. I just asked him. Ya le pregunté, Hector. ¿Ya leíste la pregunta? Ya. Gracias.
Creo que, como decía Irene, la corrupción es un elemento que nos está afectando en todo el mundo, la pobreza de igual forma. Las pocas oportunidades que hay llevan a la presión de los recursos, de las guaras, de las loras, en la mosquitia, por ejemplo. Y eso lleva también la inseguridad de aquellos que están defendiendo y que han entendido que los recursos que se tienen son para sobrevivir y llevar una vida de calidad. Creo que hay variables, diferentes variables que hacen que esto suceda, pero mucho tiene que ver la desatención en estos sitios por parte de las autoridades, creando ingobernabilidad y que genera el tráfico y que genera también el peligro de los que están guardando los recursos naturales. Pero eso se da porque hay una demanda mundial, porque hay países que están comprando, hay sitios que están demandando y que quieren más y no se sacian con lo que tienen. Entonces, eso tiene varios orígenes y en nuestro país la corrupción es uno de ellos, la desatención o falta de presencia o ingobernabilidad en la zona y en las zonas donde se están haciendo proyectos extractivos, ¿no? Entonces, genera esa inseguridad y detrás de esta inseguridad, obviamente que hay empresas que aparentemente son buenas, pero no lo son, o personas que aparentemente son de buena intención, pero no lo son. Y eso es lo que ocurre aquí, ¿verdad? Esa inseguridad generada en las localidades, en las comunidades, en los que están cuidando nuestros recursos naturales. Pero eso tiene mucho que ver con la corrupción y con la ingobernabilidad en estos sitios.
Thank you, Hector. I do want to move on to another question. Any of you, I know, Lori, you did make some suggestions already, but please, if you have more, do you guys have any experience with or have new ideas about diminishing harm to people in the parrot trade? What might have worked or what could work in the future? I know you, Janet, also had some ideas in your presentation, but do you want to expand on any ideas?
Gail,
Yes.
quiero contar una historia en Mávita que detuvo o ha ido deteniendo el tráfico y es la inversión hacia las comunidades para que hagan conservación, que sean ellos los que participen en la conservación y la protección de las especies, de las guaras, de los loros, de los pericos. Y en una ocasión estábamos en un proyecto y contratamos, se le pagó a los locales una cantidad honorable de dinero para que hicieran monitoreo biológico y vino gente de Jamaica a querer comprar polluelos, los polluelos de las guaras rojas. Y el local, como ya tenía una entrada de dinero, que eran aproximadamente entre $400 al mes, y cuando le quieren comprar un polluelo, solo le querían pagar $50. Y entonces él reflexionó y dijo, ¿cómo puedo yo venderte mi recurso que con solo cuidarlo y verlo, tengo 3 o 4 veces más de lo que tú me quieres ofrecer? Con esto lo que quiero decir es que en la medida que el bienestar en las comunidades se tenga, va a haber bienestar en la vida silvestre, en las guaras y en los otros animales que hay en nuestros bosques.
Anybody else want to add anything? Yes, I mean, certainly One Earth, we've been working in partnership with people in La Mosquitia, and some of them were previously poachers. And by training them to protect the parrots, letting them see they will have a more steady income from doing that, it has changed many of them from poachers to protectors. And we think this is an idea. We know that we're not the only ones doing this, but if this were to spread, not only would it help with wildlife conservation, poverty, and so forth, it would help with some of the immigration issues we're seeing around the world. But how do we get that message out? I don't know. I have one last question, and then we'll go to Q&A from the attendees. Why do you do the work you do? I'm sure you have thought of taking a break from it and doing something else, but what keeps you going? Why do you keep doing it? For all of you.
I think I'll start. I think just the birds themselves, you know, they need us. And, you know, for those of us that work with them every day and we see their ability to thrive in our world, you know, we want to do what's best for them, and give them an opportunity to live a more natural life. For Oasis, you know, being we do have 22 aviaries, so most of our birds do live in flock environments. So that's our goal, and that's what we want for many of the parrots. And so seeing them transition from a tiny cage, you know, a bad situation, into that type of living environment is very rewarding.
How about you, Lori? Because you focus on animal welfare all the time. I'm sure you hear our stories even beyond parrots. What keeps you going with that?
Well, not just stories, actual practice. And yeah, I think that really importantly, and this is something I tried to hint at earlier, I think that our own integrity is impinged upon when we live in a world in which there's so much violence and so much horror. And I'm not able myself to sit back and think, okay, I'm just going to let that go. I feel that all of us are connected to one another and to other animals and to birds and the planet itself. And those connections require us to act and to do whatever it is that we can do. I also find the work that, particularly in my sort of travels through sanctuary, I just find that work to be so inspirational, so crucial, so important. The work that people are doing in range countries, protecting the birds, protecting the other animals, so inspirational, so important, so crucial. It's not okay to sit on the sidelines, and I think it's really important. In my case, I can get others to get involved, and so I use my voice to do that as much as possible. And I did in different times try to do sanctuary work on a more full-time basis, but my empathy is a little too out of whack, and it's just too hard for me. I just spent my time in a sobbing, weeping heap. So I really do admire and respect everyone who's able to do that work.
Yeah, and I do want to say that I too, the Lord Kim and I, the nice thing about co-directing One Earth is we have each other to lean on, and we do. We both go through our times where it becomes unbearable to deal with some of the stories we hear. So, and we've only hit the tip of the iceberg here. So I would like to go now to questions from as many questions as I can from the attendees. And this is for most of them are for any of you, so please just jump in. I'll save ones that are a little more specific for later. Okay, so the first question I have here is, looks like a lot of relinquishment lately are from the deaths of owners going to senior care, loss of home and other financial issues, forced to move for whatever reason. And none of these seem particularly related to the pet trade, although I don't totally agree with that. How do we address that? I'd like to say they are related to the pet trade, because if they didn't have parrots as pets to begin with, it wouldn't be an issue. Okay, but does anyone else have any thoughts about that? You know, how to get the message out to people about this could happen to you. Go ahead, Janet.
Well, we deal with that all the time, and that's a huge one of our recurring messages to people is to plan for their time in need. But it is very frustrating when 70-year-old individuals go and buy a bird from a breeder, and that bird is going to outlive them, and many people just don't plan for that. So it creates that critical immediate need for us to deal with. But we do share that. And I think a lot of rescues and sanctuaries around the country are doing that more and more, talking about making those plans for their parrots. You know, we used to say the baby boomers, they're aging out, and that's where we're getting all these parrots from. I did a little research before this and saw that millennials and Gen X are actually, the percentage of pet ownership is larger for them than baby boomers. So think about that. You know, this isn't going to stop. You know, that's just something that we're going to have to think about as we move forward.
Maybe an educational campaign on that topic alone could be eye-opening for some people. Some people may not realize how long their birds could live and might go, gee, maybe I should get a dog instead.
Yeah. Well, certainly that message of adopt, you know, there are so many elderly birds in rescues that could use a good home. So if you are a retired person and you want a companion parrot, and you know, don't buy from a breeder. Go adopt one of those elderly birds that may not outlive you. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great point. Anyone else want to say anything? Okay, I'll move on to the next. What can we do to help each other, sanctuary workers and environmental activists such as those in Honduras?
Well, again, for sanctuaries, I think, you know, the need really is the people. We need help. We need space. You know, the Foster Parrots Home Sanctuary Program is an awesome thing. I've often thought about little satellite locations as well. We just need people to step up and help. And you know, if it means a day volunteering, every little bit adds up, and it does help us.
What about environmental activists or Hector? Is there anything that other people can do to help support what's happening? You know,
es bien complicado, ¿verdad? Porque a veces no tienes un líder como Berta Cáceres, que es asesinado por algo, y muchas de estas muertes se conocen porque los medios de comunicación conocen de las luchas de este activista, pero en la Mosquitia han muerto una cantidad de personas que no son icónicas, y muchas veces tienes que a veces con el riesgo publicitarlo. Suena feo, pero a veces tienes que hacer eso. Pero sin embargo, si haces eso, como la corrupción es tan grande, que te dicen no lo denuncies porque le vas a traer peligro a tu familia, ¿verdad? A la familia de los que son amenazados o los que atentaron. Y ese es el caso que nos pasó a nosotros. Nos dijeron, si hacen esa denuncia aquí localmente, no va a funcionar, no va a trabajar. Entonces, creo que podría ser que el apoyo de organizaciones que tienen un perfil alto, como Greenpeace o como otras organizaciones que puedan apoyar las mismas embajadas. Por ejemplo, en Honduras, la embajada de Estados Unidos tiene mucho poder y puede tener injerencia en las políticas, en la policía, en los militares. Entonces, si tratamos de canalizar el apoyo, puede ser a través de pedirle, por ejemplo, a la embajada de Estados Unidos ayudar, o pedirle a la embajada de la Unión Europea ayudar, o un pronunciamiento a nivel internacional. Pero hay que saberlo hacer, porque si lo haces si pones en evidencia tu nombre, pones en riesgo tu vida. Entonces hay que buscar una estrategia para no poner en riesgo de la persona que denuncia, y mucho menos a las personas que cuidan, ¿verdad? Entonces es buscar una estrategia que cuide tanto a la familia del que fue atentado o la familia de la persona que falleció.
Thank you, Hector. Yeah, this is a bit overwhelming, just this topic alone. Well, this is related to the what we're talking about now. Someone asked, how do large global movements improve our empathy? So if we were to do a large global movement, maybe it could influence some of these different issues we're hearing about. Any thoughts about it?
I think one of the things that's really important in trying to have this large global movement, I mean, empathy obviously requires skill. It's not something that it's not just that, in my view anyway, it's not just something you feel, it's something that you have to work on and figure out whether the empathy is sort of calibrated adequately and appropriately, not informed by various kinds of biases based on culture or based on other kinds of things. So it's a complicated issue, but it does seem that having a large global movement will allow for the kinds of interconnections and conversations that can help fill in the gaps of how to be empathetic and to be empathetic in a way that isn't projecting, patronizing, sort of imperialistic in any way. Those are difficult problems with the global movements, but I think that's definitely a possibility. Getting to see how these problems are just what's happened in this panel, I think, is a really important way of getting to see how these things are playing out very differently in Honduras and in Mesquite and in Kenya and in Arizona. I think those are really important pieces of an understanding that can build our empathy. I also think that it is going to require a global movement. That's certainly what has happened for chimpanzees. It took decades and decades, but that is something that I mean, it continues to be a struggle, but nothing like the struggle that it was 20 years ago. So I think there's possibilities for looking at other global movements on behalf of animals that have had good impact.
Right, thank you. Now, this may not apply everywhere, but whoops. Oh, Linda, by the way, I see your hand up. Could you put your message, your question in the chat, please? Okay. So this may not apply to all countries, but are there any mental health organizations out there who could help wonderful people that work in sanctuaries and rescues? And I'll add conservationists and veterinarians and others who are traumatized by what they see. So I don't know of any organizations that specialize specifically in that. Maybe we need to raise awareness. My husband is a psychologist. He's here somewhere. There he is. And I'm wondering if an organization like the American Psychological Association or New York State Psychological Association and others like that could have their awareness raised about this, that this is a real issue. And of course, we know it doesn't only apply to people who care about animals, but also climate activists, people who care about plants. I mean, people who are being traumatized by all the environmental degradation that's happening here. I think there might be the beginnings of a path happening within psychologists, psychiatrists, and others who work in mental health, because I've seen it more in the climate area, that there's a lot of talk about climate anxiety and the impact it's having on the younger generation and so on and so forth. Well, biodiversity loss may be having the same impact as well. So I don't know, and I don't know if anyone else knows of specific organizations that focus on this, but maybe they need to be educated as well and have their awareness raised, and we make that part of our movement.
I'd like to just briefly comment, and there may not be any organizations that that work with animal people and rescue workers, but for instance, following our fire, the Potter League over in Middletown, Rhode Island, they apparently have an on-staff trauma socialist, and they sent that woman over to foster parents to work with us, over the next several weeks, and they paid for it. So I think that we're talking about, there are therapists that specialize in trauma and PTSD, and I think maybe the biggest obstacle is the fact that even in professions like that, when it comes to trauma due to animals, a lot of people do not put the value on the trauma we feel over the loss of animals or animal suffering. It's that might be a new field, and a little bit of an obstacle to finding trauma workers who can really understand what animal people are going through.
And we actually have, I think, 2 or 3 people who just volunteered in the chat who are either psychologists or PhD students. They want to help with this. So, all right, we'll have a psychology channel and psychology, Josh, to the Slack channel. We're actually out of time because we have something special now we want to do. What I'll do is the remaining questions, perhaps we can share them with the panelists, and we will be putting their emails in the chat later, so you can contact them directly with your questions. But first of all, thank you. This is an amazing, really emotional panel. We've all learned so much from everyone, so thank you guys all so much.